The knock came like a thunderclap in the quiet of my Tuesday morning. One sharp, deliberate tap on the door that made my chest tighten and my stomach do a slow flip. I froze, a mug of still warm coffee in my hand, staring at the door like it might somehow vanish if I didn't acknowledge it. But the knock came again, patient, insistent. I wasn't expecting anyone, not really. My life had settled into a quiet rhythm after years of juggling work, the kids' school schedules, and the slow unraveling of my own unanswered questions about family. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator behind me, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock above the kitchen sink. Everything smelled ordinary, the faint scent of burnt toast lingering in the air, the coffee I hadn't quite finished brewing, the softness of sunlight filtering through the blinds. And then there was the knock, again. I set my mug down on the counter with more force than I intended, the ceramic clinking against the countertop, and I walked to the door. My hands felt heavier than they should have, my pulse louder than normal. When I opened it, the world shifted. There he was, or to be precise, someone who looked like he might belong in my world but somehow did not. A stranger with the same sharp jawline I had only seen in childhood photographs of my mother, the same dark eyes that I thought were unique to me. He looked hesitant, almost afraid, but there was a determination in his stance that made my chest tighten even more. "Hi," he said, his voice cracking just slightly, not out of fear, but something heavier, something like memory. I think I'm your brother." My mind stalled, spun, and stalled again. Brother? The word tasted foreign in my mouth, almost like a lie I wasn't ready to taste. I'm sorry?" My voice came out thin, uncertain, fumbling. "My name's Daniel," he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I think we share the same mother." I laughed, a short, bitter sound that made me stumble backward into the hallway. It wasn't a laugh of amusement, it was disbelief. Disbelief wrapped in fear, wrapped in the feeling that my world had just been nudged off its axis. I wanted to slam the door, to tell him he was crazy, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't let me. I could feel the blood pulsing in my ears, my throat tight. There were too many memories in my mind all at once. Memories of a mother who had given me up for adoption when I was 3. Memories of wondering if anyone else was out there. Memories of photos I'd shoved into boxes in the attic. Faces I'd never known, names I didn't recognize. Daniel, or whoever he was, stood there, waiting, shifting in a way that made me understand this wasn't a joke, not for him. I finally managed to speak. How did you find me?" He hesitated, the weight of years between us almost tangible in the space of the doorway. "I found out about you a few months ago," he said slowly, carefully, like each word was being dredged from some deep, painful well. "I wasn't sure. I didn't even know if you'd want to meet me, but I had to try. I wanted to close the door. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. And yet, I wanted to know." That morning, before the knock, life had been simple, or as simple as it could be when your days were packed with school runs, emails from work, and the small, constant hum of responsibilities. My husband, Marcus, was still asleep upstairs, oblivious to the earthquake happening at our front door. The kids were at school, their absence making the house feel like it was holding its breath. Everything had been normal, ordinary, safe. And now that safety was gone. I stepped back and let him in. My kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the walls closer, my heart beating in a rhythm I didn't recognize. Daniel took off his coat and hung it on the hook by the door, his fingers brushing mine for a moment. A small human gesture that made the reality of it all hit me harder. I offered him coffee, automatically, though my hands were trembling. He accepted, nodding, his eyes not leaving mine. I kept thinking I would wake up, that this was some strange dream, but every tick of the wall clock reminded me it wasn't. This was real. I guess we should talk, I managed finally, my voice barely above a whisper. My own words sounded foreign, but there was an undercurrent in me that wanted this truth, needed it maybe. He nodded. "Yeah, I think we have a lot to catch up on." I sank into a chair, gripping the mug like it was a lifeline. And as I looked at him, I realized something I hadn't expected. The world I had thought I knew, the family I had built, the identity I'd spent a lifetime shaping, it was all about to change, and I had no map for where to go next. For years, I had lived with the idea that there were gaps in my life, missing pieces I never knew existed. And here, standing on my porch, was one of them. One knock, that was all it took. Before that morning, my life had a rhythm that felt safe. Not perfect, not without its bumps, but steady enough that I could breathe without expecting the ground to shift beneath me. I lived in a modest 2-story house on the quieter side of town. The kitchen window faced the backyard, where Marcus had planted marigolds along the fence, and the air often smelled faintly of soil and early blooms. The house was ours, the kind of home that bore the marks of living. Crayon on the refrigerator, worn spots in the carpet where the kids' feet had pounded over the years, the faint scent of Marcus's cologne lingering in the hallways after he'd left for work. Marcus was my anchor in ways both quiet and visible. He had a laugh that could cut through the tension in any room and a patience that often exasperated me, but it was the kind of patience that kept our family from unraveling on ordinary bad days. Our kids, Ellie and Sam, were 10 and 8, still the right mixture of mischievous and tender, their personalities weaving into our lives like threads you didn't even notice until one day they were the tapestry itself. Mornings were hectic but familiar. Toast with peanut butter for Sam, scrambled eggs and toast for Ellie, coffee for Marcus and me, always too strong, always necessary. I would sip it while checking my emails, scanning the day ahead like a general plotting a campaign no one else knew about. And yet, in that predictable life, there had always been a quiet, hollow space I didn't name. I'd grown up as an only child, adopted at 3 after my mother made the impossible choice of letting me go. My adoptive parents, Mildred and George, had given me love in abundance, but the questions never went away. Who else was out there? Did I have siblings? Would I ever know my own story? Over the years, I had filed those questions into neat mental drawers. They were someday questions, the kind you tuck behind a smile when people ask about your childhood. I had told myself that maybe I didn't need answers, that I had a family now, a life I had built carefully, brick by brick, heart by heart. That morning, the one before Daniel knocked, I had been humming while putting Ellie's hair into a braid, the rhythm of the brush like a lullaby I'd repeated 1,000 times. Sam had been at the table, pencil in hand, finishing his homework, muttering complaints about math I barely understood. Marcus was already at his desk upstairs, headset on, typing rapidly for a meeting he'd probably forgotten he had in 5 minutes. Everything smelled like routine. Toast, coffee, warm bread, a faint hint of Marcus's cologne that always clung to the stairs. It was the kind of ordinary that felt permanent, like the world could not possibly shift in one knock, one name, one revelation. That's the thing about life before a storm. You don't know it's coming. You can't hear the warning in the wind because the air feels too still, too warm, too familiar. And when it hits with everything it has. The week before Daniel appeared, nothing had felt out of place. I had gone to work, sorted files, sat through meetings with the same polite smile I always wore. I had laughed at Sam's bad jokes and tucked Ellie's drawings into a scrapbook with the care of someone preserving memories that, in hindsight, felt like preparation for something I hadn't yet known. Even the small things, the way Marcus would bring me coffee without being asked, the way Ellie would leave sticky notes in my lunch bag with hearts and reminders, had all felt like markers of normalcy. A life carefully curated, a home full of warmth, a family that was predictable in its love and imperfection. And in that ordinary life, I had built walls around the unanswered questions. I had learned to sit with the uncertainty of my adoption quietly, tucking it behind a smile or a polite, "I don't know," when people asked about my birth family. It had never haunted me too much because it had never intruded on the present. My past was a distant shore, one I didn't think I'd ever return to. I didn't know that all of it, the smell of toast, the hum of the refrigerator, the light filtering through the blinds, would become the stage for a revelation that could undo it all. I didn't know that the hollow space I'd ignored for so long had a name, a face, and a knock on my door. Before that day, my life had been ordinary, comfortable, predictable, and I believed I had enough love to fill the spaces in my heart. But sometimes, no matter how full your heart is, life reminds you that there are truths waiting to be discovered, truths that will upend even the calmest mornings. Little did I know, one knock would begin a journey I had not prepared for, a journey that would make me question identity, belonging, and the definition of family itself. And when the knock came, it changed everything. The days after Daniel's knock felt like walking through fog. I went through the motions, making breakfast, sending the kids off to school, pretending at work that nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, everything had shifted. Even the familiar smell of toast made me pause, reminded me of the morning he had stepped onto my porch, his eyes scanning me like he'd been practicing recognition for years. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was overreacting, that I needed to be polite, that maybe he would go away if I just kept things normal. But nothing about him, nothing about that first encounter felt normal. There was a tension in his presence that I couldn't place. Small things. The way he lingered in the doorway, even when I offered him a chair. The way his eyes flicked to family photos on the walls like he was trying to memorize a life he'd just discovered existed. The way he hesitated before taking a sip of coffee, as if even the simplest gestures had meaning he wasn't sure he deserved. The first clue that this wasn't going to be a brief visit came one evening when Marcus came home. Daniel had stayed for dinner. I hadn't had the heart to send him away. And I watched from the kitchen as he tried, awkwardly, to navigate the rhythms of a family that was not his own. Ellie asked him questions, wide-eyed and curious. Do you like pizza? What's your favorite color? Do you have a dog? And he answered them all with patience, but there was a flicker, just a flicker that made me notice. A glance at my children that was almost too familiar, like he was searching for something he could recognize in them. A way of sitting at the table that mirrored my own gestures, just slightly off, as if he were copying habits without realizing it. Later, when we were clearing the dishes, I asked him casually, almost to myself, "Did you ever meet anyone else from my birth family?" He hesitated, the knives clinking against the sink, a counterpoint to the silence that followed. "I met some people," he said carefully, "but I don't know them, not really. I just knew they existed." It was a small statement, innocuous on its surface, but the way he said it, his voice dropping slightly at the end, like admitting a weight he couldn't fully name, hit me in a way I hadn't expected. It was the first real clue that he wasn't just a visitor, wasn't just a stranger I could politely usher out. He was someone whose presence had history I didn't yet understand. Over the next week, I started noticing more. The way he lingered over small details in the house, touching things hesitantly as if they were relics of a world he had glimpsed but never belonged to. The way he asked about my mother, about my childhood, about things I'd never thought I'd say aloud. And the hardest part, the part that unsettled me the most, was the way I felt about it. I was drawn to him, compelled to answer questions I hadn't asked myself. There was a pull, a gravitational tug towards something I didn't understand. At the same time, I felt fear, the kind that curls in your chest and makes you short of breath. Fear that this revelation could tear apart everything I had worked so hard to build. One evening, Marcus noticed it too. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Daniel had gone home for the night, but the tension lingered like smoke in the air. "You're distracted," Marcus said, his voice gentle but steady. "Something's going on." I wanted to tell him. I wanted to explain the truth about Daniel, about the revelation that had shaken the foundation of my world, but I couldn't. Not yet. The words felt too heavy, too fragile, like saying them aloud would make everything collapse. "I'm fine," I said instead, and I lied convincingly. But even as I said it, I felt the weight of unspoken truths pressing down. The next clue arrived unexpectedly. I had gone up to the attic to search for some old photo albums, childhood snapshots I hadn't seen in years, and found something I hadn't anticipated, A stack of letters, yellowed and fragile, tucked into a box I'd ignored countless times. They were from my birth mother, letters she had written but never sent, detailing fragments of her life, her regrets, her hope that I was happy. And tucked between them, carefully folded, was a birth certificate I hadn't remembered seeing, with names I recognized only now, names that confirmed what I had been afraid to know. Daniel's name. I sat there on the floor, the dust motes dancing in the beam of sunlight through the attic window, and realized that he wasn't just a visitor, or a stranger, or a coincidence. He was proof of a story I hadn't known existed, a story that had been waiting, quietly, for years, just for this moment. And suddenly, the reality hit me fully. This was no longer a simple visit. It was the beginning of a reckoning. A reckoning I wasn't sure I was ready for. I remember the exact moment it sank in. The moment the pieces of my life I thought were complete shattered into something jagged and unfamiliar. It was late afternoon, the kind of late February light that filters through blinds at a low angle, making everything look golden and fragile. Daniel was sitting on my couch, his hands clasped nervously in his lap, eyes darting around my living room like he was trying to memorize it all before it disappeared. I had been pacing the kitchen, unable to sit, unable to calm the storm in my chest. "You need to tell me everything," I finally said, my voice trembling more than I cared to admit. He looked up, and I could see the same mix of fear and determination in his eyes that had haunted me since the day he appeared. "I will," he said quietly. I don't even know where to start." "Start at the beginning," I snapped, more harshly than I intended. "I don't care about niceties. I don't care about what's polite. I need the truth, Daniel. I stopped myself, trying to catch my breath. "I need to understand why you're here." He took a deep breath, and I could see him bracing himself for impact. "I was adopted too," he said finally, "by different people. I grew up knowing there were gaps, things I didn't know about my family. And a few months ago, I found your name, your birth certificate, photos, the letters. I couldn't ignore it. I had to find you." The words landed like heavy stones in my chest. My hand went to my mouth as if I could physically stop the reality of them from being true. Daniel, my brother, my mother's other child. He had been out there all this time, existing in a life parallel to mine, and I had never known. I felt a rush of emotions so intense I didn't know where to begin. Shock, disbelief, anger, grief, longing. My legs buckled, and I sank into the nearest chair, gripping the armrests as if they could anchor me to something familiar. I can't believe this," I whispered. "All these years and you just appear?" He nodded, his own hands trembling. "I didn't know how you'd react. I didn't know if you'd even want me here. But I had to try. I had to see you." I looked at him, the face I had never seen, but somehow knew. The same eyes, the same curve of the jaw, the subtle tilt of his head when he was thinking. He was mine, and yet he was a stranger. My chest tightened as grief and wonder collided. I don't even know what to say," I admitted, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. Do you know what this means? That you exist, that we share a mother?" "I do," he said softly. "I've been thinking about it every day since I found you. But I also know I can't just step into your life and assume I belong. I don't want to disrupt you. I had to meet you. I had to know." And in that moment, the world narrowed down to that room, that couch, that conversation. Everything else, work, kids, obligations, slipped away. I was staring at someone who held a mirror to a life I had only imagined in fragments, a life I had never known I was missing. I asked him about our mother, about the life he had lived without me, about the questions I had never dared to speak aloud, and he answered. his voice low, sometimes breaking, filled with the same yearning I felt. He told me about the longing he had carried, the gaps in his own heart, the moments when he had wondered if anyone out there knew the story of our beginnings. We sat there for hours, the world outside fading, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. And with every story, every recollection, every revelation, the room filled with something heavier than words. Grief, yes, but also recognition, belonging, a connection I hadn't thought possible after decades of feeling whole in the absence of knowledge. And then the anger came. Subtle at first, like a shadow creeping across a sunlit room. Anger at my mother for the secrets, for the gaps, for the absence. Anger at fate for keeping us apart for so long. And even, quietly, anger at myself for the years I had spent imagining a life I didn't realize was incomplete. Daniel reached out, his hand covering mine. He said, "We can be angry later. Right now, let's just be here, together." I wanted to push him away, to retreat, to tell him he didn't understand, but I couldn't, because in that touch, in that simple acknowledgement, I felt the first fragile thread of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that maybe this unexpected reunion, this upheaval, this unearthing of hidden truths could lead to something more than confusion and grief. That maybe, just maybe, we could start to piece together the story we had both been missing. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the revelation pressing against every corner of my being. I could hear Marcus's soft breathing beside me, the faint hum of the streetlights outside, and I realized that nothing, no morning, no routine, no past sense of stability would ever feel the same again. And yet, there was a strange comfort in knowing that the missing piece of my life had a face, a name, a heartbeat. Knowing that despite the years, despite the distance, despite the silence, we had found each other. The truth had arrived, uninvited, abrupt, and irreversible. And now, there was no going back. The morning after Daniel stayed, I woke up to the quiet hum of the house. Ellie and Sam still at school, Marcus already gone to work. The kind of morning that once felt ordinary now carried a weight I couldn't shake. I moved through the motions of brushing my teeth, pouring coffee, even checking the mailbox, but every step felt like walking through someone else's life. I needed to think. I needed a plan, or at least a semblance of control, because right now, control felt like a concept I had lost the moment Daniel's hand brushed mine in the living room. I found myself casing again, circling the kitchen table like a predator or a parent pacing the hallway while a sick child sleeps. My mind was a whirlwind. How do I explain this to Marcus? How do I navigate the kids' questions when they eventually notice someone new? What boundaries are fair? How do I not let curiosity and excitement derail the careful family I have built? I decided to start small. I called my sister-in-law, my closest confidant who had been through more family chaos than anyone I trusted, and told her the truth. "You won't believe this," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "A man came to my door. He says he's my brother, my birth brother." There was silence on the other end, a pause long enough to make me doubt everything. Then she asked softly, "Do you think he's telling the truth?" I laughed, bitter and sharp. "I don't know. I think I want to. But how do you even check something like this? DNA, birth certificates, letters?" Her answer was simple, practical, grounding. Start by letting him stay a little. Watch, listen, ask questions. See if the story holds. You don't have to decide anything today. That's what I did. I watched, I listened, I asked questions. And with each answer, I felt both relief and disorientation. Relief that he wasn't lying, that the fragments of truth matched, that the history he recounted aligned with the documents I had found in the attic. Disorientation because suddenly, the line between my real life and this new, uncharted life blurred in ways I hadn't anticipated. Daniel became a presence in the house without ever overstaying boundaries. He helped with small tasks, fixing a leaking faucet, rearranging old photo albums, asking questions about the family recipes my grandmother had passed down. But it wasn't the chores that mattered. It was the way he asked about my childhood, the small pauses before his questions, the reverence in his tone. It was the way he seemed to absorb the life I had, as if he were trying to stitch himself into it without tearing the edges. And then there was the hardest part, telling Marcus. I had put it off, fearful of how he would react. Marcus was practical, grounded, the kind of man who needed facts and structure, not revelations that shook the foundation of existence. When I finally told him, I did it cautiously, as if speaking slowly might make the news less seismic. Marcus, I began, voice tight. There's something you need to know. A man came to the door last week. He says he's my birth brother. My birth brother. Marcus blinked, then blinked again, and then after a long pause asked the single question that made my heart clench. And do you believe him? I took a deep breath. I think I have to. Everything, it lines up. The letters, the documents, the way he talks about our mother, it's him. It has to be. He nodded slowly, silent for a moment, processing, and then he said something I will never forget. Okay, then let's figure out how this works, together. That simple sentence, unadorned and steady, gave me the courage to face the next challenge, the children. I wasn't sure how to explain it to Ellie and Sam. How do you tell a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old that someone they never knew existed is suddenly part of their world, that their family, as they knew it, has just grown in ways they can't yet comprehend? I decided honesty, tempered with sensitivity, was best. I waited until dinner, when the kids were laughing about a school project, the warmth of the kitchen wrapping around us. Daniel was sitting at the table, quiet, respectful, offering small smiles but allowing space. Kids, I began, voice gentle, there's something important I want to share. This is Daniel. Ellie looked at him with wide eyes. Who is he? He's my brother, I said softly. Your uncle, in a way, someone I never knew existed until recently, but he's part of our family now. Sam tilted his head. He's our uncle? Yes, I said. And he's also someone who's been looking for me, for us, for a long time. He's family. Ellie studied Daniel for a long moment, then said slowly, So you're like our other mom's brother? I laughed quietly. Something like that, and we're going to figure it out together. The rest of the evening was a mix of tentative questions, laughter that felt hesitant but real, and small moments of connection that reminded me how fragile and beautiful family could be. Daniel told a story about a dog he had growing up. Sam related it to the dog we had now. Ellie asked about his favorite color, and somehow, just like that, ordinary moments, moments of routine and connection, started bridging the gap between what had been and what was emerging. But even as I smiled, even as I felt threads of hope weaving into our lives, a quiet voice in the back of my mind reminded me that integration would not be easy. There would be boundaries, missteps, friction. There would be days I would question whether this revelation was a gift or a burden. And yet I could feel deep in my chest that facing it head-on, embracing the reality of Daniel's presence, was the only path forward. The first action, I realized, wasn't dramatic or confrontational. It was simple, acknowledging the truth, creating space, and taking deliberate steps to integrate this unexpected piece of my life into the tapestry of what had been carefully built. And that, in itself, felt revolutionary. Word traveled faster than I expected. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it was just the way family news always does. Whispers in the grocery store aisle, curious glances at school pickups, phone calls from relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. It started with my sister-in-law texting, "Saw Daniel's photo on your feed? He's your brother?" And then the questions. From my parents, my coworkers, even a neighbor whose curiosity usually hovered at polite levels. "I heard someone came to your door. Is this true?" Yes, it was true. And suddenly, my private revelation, the intimate, sacred moment Daniel and I had shared in my living room, was subject to the scrutiny of everyone else. Some reactions were tender, filled with excitement or empathy. My childhood friends who had grown up with the knowledge that I was adopted were fascinated, sending messages of support, encouragement, and curiosity. "He's lucky to have found you," one friend wrote, "and you're lucky to have found him." But not all responses were kind. Some carried judgment, subtle accusations, or unsolicited advice. "Are you sure this is wise?" a coworker asked, tilting her head as if I were contemplating something reckless. "Family is complicated. People get hurt." I understood her caution. I understood it more than anyone could imagine. But there was also an anger simmering beneath my skin. Why should discovery and connection be met with doubt? Why should the legitimacy of our reunion be questioned, as if the emotional truth wasn't enough? The bigger challenge, though, came from my parents, the ones who had raised me, the ones I had believed were my foundation. My mother, Mildred, called first, her voice thick with emotion. Are you sure this is real?" she asked, almost whispering, as if the question itself might shatter the fragile bridge Daniel and I were building. "I have to believe it, Mom," I said softly. "The documents, the letters, everything lines up. He's real. He's my brother." There was silence on the line, heavy and hesitant. I just never imagined this. I never thought that something like this could happen after all these years. "I didn't either," I admitted. "But it has, and now it's our choice what to do with it." George, my father, was quieter, practical in his response. "You'll need boundaries. You'll need rules. This doesn't change your life overnight, but it's part of it now." And he was right. Integration, I realized, wasn't just emotional, it was logistical. There were conversations to have, schedules to manage, holidays to renegotiate. There were days Daniel would feel like family, and days I would want to retreat into the life I had carefully constructed. Outside of family, there were curious glances and whispered questions in the neighborhood. Friends asked if Daniel was really your brother, as if DNA were proof enough, yet somehow not enough. At school, teachers noticed the extra presence at pickup, and I had to explain carefully, gently, the nature of this newfound relationship without oversharing or making the children uncomfortable. And yet, amidst the curiosity and scrutiny, there was a strange affirmation in these reactions. The world noticing him, acknowledging him, made the reunion feel less like a secret I was carrying alone and more like a reality I had to honor. The most difficult encounter came at a small family gathering I had organized a few weeks later. Extended relatives, some of whom I hadn't seen in years, gathered in my living room, curious and hesitant. Daniel was there, quiet, observing the dynamics, the inherited gestures and laughter that I had grown up with and that he had never experienced. One cousin, blunt and sharp, asked, "So, you're really related? How does that even work?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, he's my brother. We share the same mother. That's the truth." Another relative shook her head slowly. "After all these years, I don't know how this will feel. It's complicated." It was complicated, and it would be for a long time. There were side glances, whispered conversations, even subtle avoidance from those unsure how to navigate this new reality. But there were also moments of quiet acceptance, a handshake from my aunt, a warm smile from my grandmother, a small nod from a cousin who had been skeptical but chose connection over doubt. Through it all, I realized something essential. Public consequences weren't just about judgment or curiosity. They were about the reality that life cannot exist in a vacuum. Every choice we make, every revelation we embrace ripples outward. Daniel's presence didn't just affect me, it affected everyone who loved me, everyone tied to my world in any way. And it made me aware, painfully aware, that the journey wasn't just about discovering him, it was about discovering the resilience, patience, and love that could carry us all through a world suddenly expanded, complicated, and richer for the truth. It didn't happen overnight. There were no miraculous moments where all the pieces fell neatly into place. Daniel didn't suddenly become part of our family in the way I had imagined when I first opened the door. Some days it was small, a shared laugh over an inside joke, a story exchanged about our mother, a glance that carried recognition without words. Other days, the tension returned, old habits, misaligned expectations, the delicate dance of merging two lives that had grown separately for decades. But slowly, very slowly, we found rhythm. The first breakthrough came during a weekend at the park. The kids were running around, chasing a frisbee, while Daniel and I sat on a bench, watching. I noticed how naturally he interacted with them, the way he mirrored their energy without overshadowing it. He laughed when Sam fell over and didn't scold when Ellie argued over the rules. I saw a patience in him that mirrored my own, and suddenly the idea of family stretched to include him felt less like an imposition and more like a possibility. "Thank you for trusting me with them," Daniel said quietly. I turned to him, surprised by the weight of his words. "No," I said softly. "Thank you for showing up. That matters more than anything." There were nights when we talked about our childhoods, the fragments of memory that overlapped, the stories of a mother we both loved but had never fully known. We shared tears, laughter, anger, and sometimes silence, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty because it's filled with understanding. Marcus, always steady, became our anchor. He didn't try to replace anyone, nor did he insist on rushing the process. He simply held the space, supported the family we had and the family we were building. He reminded me, gently, that healing wasn't linear, that we didn't have to get it right every time. That, I think, made all the difference. Even the children began to adjust. Ellie started leaving little drawings for Daniel, small reminders that he was part of our world now. Sam asked questions, more boldly, about Daniel's life, what it had been like growing up, and why we had never known. Daniel answered patiently, without defensiveness, and in those moments, I saw bonds forming that no longer felt fragile or forced. We celebrated holidays differently that year. Thanksgiving included a toast to family, old and new, and Daniel, tentative at first, spoke quietly about gratitude and discovery. His words were simple but profound, carrying the weight of someone who had waited a lifetime for belonging. I realized, slowly, that the greatest lesson wasn't about reunion or discovery, it was about resilience, about our ability to accept the complexities of life, the imperfect truths, and still choose connection over fear, about knowing that family isn't always about the years you've spent together, but the choices you make once you've found each other. I even went back to the attic one day, the place where I had found the letters that confirmed Daniel's existence. I held them carefully, running my fingers over the paper, and I realized something. The past, while important, doesn't define the present. It's a map, not a cage. The letters had brought Daniel to me, but it was the courage to open the door, to sit with him, to speak honestly, that allowed our family to grow. And there were moments, quiet and intimate, when I would look at him, the stranger who shared my blood, my mother, my history, and feel a warmth I hadn't anticipated. It was not the rush of instant love or perfect understanding. It was deeper, steadier, like water carving a new riverbed through rock. It was the awareness that even in the face of long absence, the human heart has the capacity to expand, to forgive, to embrace what is new without erasing what came before. I don't pretend that everything is seamless. There are still questions, still adjustments, Still moments when the past intrudes, but now the intrusion feels navigable rather than paralyzing. Daniel has become part of our life, not as a replacement for what we had, but as an addition, a new thread in the fabric of our family. And me? I have learned to sit with the uncertainty, the shock, and the overwhelming emotions and recognize them for what they are. Signs that life is alive, that connection is possible even when it feels improbable, that discovery, even painful and unexpected, can lead to healing. One evening, as I tucked the kids to bed, I paused at their door, listening to their soft breathing. Daniel was in the kitchen, quietly washing the dishes, humming a tune I didn't recognize. Marcus sat beside me on the couch, his hand resting on mine, and I realized something I hadn't known until that moment. The house felt full again. Full not because it had returned to what it was, but because it had grown into something larger than I had imagined possible. Life is rarely neat. It doesn't always give closure in the ways we hope, but it does offer moments, small, fragile, profound, where truth, courage, and love converge. And sometimes those moments arrive with a knock on the door. Sometimes I still think about that knock, that single, sharp, unexpected tap on my door that changed everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, and my life. I think about the fear, the disbelief, the hesitation, and the moments of courage that followed. And I wonder, how often do we let fear stop us from embracing the unknown, from opening the door to possibility, even when it's uncomfortable? Finding Daniel wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't simple or perfect or easy. There were hard conversations, awkward moments, and days when I doubted myself, doubted him, doubted whether family could ever truly expand after such a long absence. But there was also growth, love, laughter, and the quiet reassurance that even the parts of life that surprise us most profoundly can bring something beautiful if we have the courage to face them. I share this story not because it's extraordinary, it's not, but because it is human, because life has a way of testing us, of revealing what we don't know, and sometimes of gifting us with pieces we didn't even realize were missing. And in those moments, we have a choice: to retreat or to embrace, to close the door or to let it swing open and see who or what waits on the other side. So I ask you gently, as I sit here reflecting on all that has passed, what would you do if someone from your past, someone you never knew, suddenly appeared at your door? Would you step back in fear or step forward in hope? Life isn't perfect and families aren't either, but the love we choose to nurture, the courage to face the unknown, and the grace we extend to others, that is what defines us. If this story resonated with you, or if it reminded you of someone you've been meaning to reconnect with, take a moment today to reach out. Life is short, and sometimes the most profound connections come when we least expect them. Would you have opened the door? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story.